Hi guys, and welcome to the Stephen King Sematary Club. We are starting with Small Fires, Big Brother. So after the blackout, Charlie and Rainbird are starting to get really buddy-buddy. They're starting to get very conspiratorial, and Charlie, being 8 years old, doesn't realize that Rainbird is manipulating her and just feeding her everything that will inspire her to start fires. He starts saying, well, if you demand things, and if you put your foot down and insist that they give you things in exchange for lighting fires, then you are in control. You hold all the cards. So Rainbird wants her to trade fires for favors. He said you could start small, asking to take a walk outside, eventually, petting the horses, riding the horses, maybe a day trip. We could go to an amusement park together. He is basically leading her to eventually ask to see her dad, because that is the end game. She wants to see her dad. Eventually, once she's lit enough fires, she's going to start saying no, not unless I see my father, and that's going to cause problems for the people who are studying her. Rainbow doesn't care. He wants to possibly start getting this ball rolling, because remember, he wants to be the one to kill Charlie, and he can't do that until she is at a point where she, because she obviously can't see her dad anymore, because the two of them together will find out that Rainbird is conspiring. The whole thing was set up with her friendship, that kind of thing. So she cannot meet her father. So once that card is in play, everything's over. Andy and Dr. Pinchot are walking around the grounds. The doctor is telling Andy that, he sees no progress in his mental abilities to push people, and he will be sent to Hawaii. And that's just kind of a fancy term for getting Andy out of the way. He'll kind of be an insurance policy if they need him, but likely he will just be killed. Andy decides it's now or never, and he starts pushing the doctor into saying that, maybe I need to stick around. Maybe you haven't run all the tests. Maybe just a few more tests would be good. Try to buy himself some time. And the doctor agrees. And Andy had to push him a little harder than he would have liked, and that sets off one of those ricochets in the guy's brain, which, if Andy doesn't correct these little brain echoes, then the person can eventually self-destruct. He doesn't really have time to fix it. They're being observed, and so he hopes that that's enough to buy him some time, which it is. The doctor agrees. He's like, fine, we'll do more tests. So Andy is able to stay for another 3 months, and he kind of gets a layout of the land, but that's all he has time for. Charlie has started lighting little baby fires, and she has very specific instructions. She needs a body of water. She needs things reinforced with steel, things that are not flammable. She wants to make sure that people don't burn up, that things don't get away from her. She's being very cautious, and the people who are observing her don't really believe that she's as powerful as she really is. So they're kind of half-heartedly going along with these safety measures and safety protocol. Dr. Hochstetter, who is doing the testing, Charlie hates him. She just does not like him. And she says to him, quote, "Only you go in the other room there. I don't want to have to look at you while I do it." Charlie stared at Hochstetter inscrutably. Something might happen. Hochstetter's paternal smile faltered a little, page 279. Charlie's power has gotten even stronger, and the results of her test are insanely impressive to the people studying her, and there's just a whole bunch of excitement. There's fear. The attendant in the room with her, he freaks out because of the heat, and he bolts, leaves the door open, and Charlie kind of wanders away while everyone is, excitedly clapping each other on the back and going over the readouts and all that stuff. Finally, they realize that Charlie is missing, and Rainbird is, smugly saying, well, one of you has to go get her. Who wants to do it? And everyone is kind of starting to get really afraid of Charlie just in general because of her capabilities. So Cap is the one who ends up going to get Charlie and then bringing her back. And this has definitely put the ball in Charlie's court because she has such power and she could just disintegrate anyone who gets in her way, anyone who makes her mad. So these people are starting to become aware of the danger of working with her and studying her. So John takes Charlie to the stables and she meets a horse named Necromancer, and she loves the horse, she's petting it. Quote, "It did not occur to her that she would light another half-dozen fires just to ride on him with John beside her, but Rainbird saw it in her eyes, and he smiled. She looked around at him suddenly and saw the smile, and for a moment, the hand she had been stroking the horse's muzzle with paused. There was something in that smile she didn't like, and she had thought she liked everything about John." Page 287. So Charlie is pleased that she is more in control of the fires. She is not as scared as she had been because the power just kind of got away from her and she didn't know how to put it out all the time. Now she seems to be able to kind of be more precise in lighting the fire and in diffusing the fire. So she is able to do a lot more now that she has control over it. Dr. Pinchot, he has killed himself. And Cap breaks the news to Andy himself. He calls Andy into his office and he talks to him about it. And Andy realizes that he needs to act quickly. So he needs to push Cap now that they're alone, and it's unlikely that Cap's office will be bugged. So he says, the two of us are going to go to the funeral for the doctor and we will ride together alone. You can have people in cars in front of us, behind us, to the side of us, whatever, but we will be alone and we're going to discuss things. Cap agrees and he lets Andy go, and Andy pretends to be very upset about the news. He's still pretending to be drugged, so he's still trying to act sluggish, not make any sudden movements, not look too intelligent because he's supposed to be just completely useless and knocked out. He pushes really hard and he gets a whole bunch of information from Cap about Rainbird and about Charlie and about the duplicitousness of the situation. So he finds out that Rainbird is using Charlie and he is going to eventually kill Charlie when she is of no use to them anymore, and he has really, really dug in his claws and is friends with Charlie, and he gets all this information from Cap and is just really starting to freak out internally about what's going to happen to Charlie if he messes this up, if he dies. Next chapter is Endgame. So there are more tests on Charlie with way more extreme results. She burns brick, she burns stuff that really isn't flammable, but once you apply enough heat to something it will burn. So she does a lot of that. She's very precise in her usage of her power, and she can raise temperatures quickly, like really fast, and just with pinpoint accuracy. And there are some internal memos going around, and this guy named Brad, he gives a memo to Hochstetter, the guy who's in charge of these tests, and he says, quote, "God forgive me for saying this with 3 lovely girls of my own, but I personally will breathe a sigh of relief when she's been neutralized. If she can produce 30,000 degrees of spot heat without even trying, have you ever thought what might happen if she really set her mind to it?" It's on page 306 to 307. So finally she demands to see her father. She has decided no more fires until she sees Andy. And Hochstetter he's started to get nervous about her, and now he's with her, and she's demanding to see her father, and he has to tell her no, and he's becoming aware of how little control he has over the situation. Quote, "Only John Rainbird had an effective check rein on her now, and Rainbird was nuts." Page 307. So Hochstetter is like, and Charlie keeps threatening him too, so she knows that he's afraid of her, and she is very willing to use that and say, hey, something bad might happen to you, kind of thing. Andy and Cap go to the funeral together, they have their talk, and they have decided that Cap will change the departure time for his going to Hawaii. He's going to move it up to this Wednesday. He will send Rainbird away so that Rainbird is in a different city on Wednesday. And Cap will pass a note to Charlie that Andy gives him. So Cap does all this stuff naturally. He doesn't act as though he's been influenced. He just starts doing this stuff himself. And Andy has already started off a little ricochet in his brain having to do with golf and snakes. So that's unfortunately going to get worse the more Andy pushes on Cap. So Cap visits Charlie, and she realizes with his behavior that he's acting like some of the people in the past that Andy helped out with his push, especially a guy that she remembered who had a ricochet in his brain that Andy had to fix. And Cap passes her the note. She reads it. She has nightmares because, John Rainbird has fucked her over, and she is just she's so betrayed and hurt, and it upsets her. She has some nightmares. The people who are monitoring her notice that she's raised the temperature in her room. She goes into the bathroom in the middle of the night, and when she builds up this heat inside of her, she has to cast it out into water. So Rainbird, when he tries to talk to Charlie the next morning, he finds her to be not completely abrasive and cold, but much different than what she usually is. And he knew that she had a bad night. He knew that she was up all night. And he's still suspicious because she's never acted this way toward him since they became friends. So he starts looking at the surveillance tapes. He sees that Cap has passed her a note, kind of. Once he enhances it and looks at the stuff, he realizes, oh yeah, something fishy is going on. So Rainbird now has the advantage because he has realized that there is a plan in place between Cap and Andy and now Charlie, and he's going to stand in the way. Cap already told him to be out of town on Wednesday. He's going to send him to San Diego to do a job. Rainbird pretends he's sick. He begs to get off of it, and Cap's like, no, you can't. So Rainbird changes in the computer what's going to happen, and he, assigns someone else. So next is Firestarter. And Cap is completely unraveling, he's going further and further into this whole fear about golf and snakes. His brother had been bitten by a snake, and the snake had crawled over Cap's foot, and he just has this really, really deep-seated fear of snakes, and now it's just ricocheting around in his brain. Andy, Charlie, and Rainbird on this Wednesday are all kind of waiting for things to be put into play. And Rainbird waits in the barn, which is where Charlie is going to be dropped off. She goes to the barn. Agent is kind of scared off by Charlie. She makes his gun hot. She threatens him. She's basically like, you need to get out of here. Get out of here now. And the guy runs away. So it's just the two of them in the barn, and Rainbird calls down to her. And she is angry. She is ready to just burn him up. And he says, oh, but wait. There are all these horses in here, and they're all locked in their stalls, and you will kill them. Rainbird invites her up into the loft, and she starts to head up, because he says they have unfinished business, which we know means he's going to kill her, and Charlie is starting to realize that herself. Quote, because even though she understood the shape of that dark truth, her feet began to move toward the loft ladder. It wasn't talking that he was talking about, it was ending. Ending the doubt, the misery, the fear. Ending the temptation to make even bigger fires until some awful end came of it. In his own twisted, mad way, he was talking about being her friend in a way no one else could be. And yes, part of her wanted that. Part of her wanted an ending and a release. Page 359. So poor Charlie, she is kind of thinking that maybe the best way out of this is to just end it all. Just be dead, end the suffering and end her crazy mutant life. And it's really sad that she feels that way. But then her dad bursts in, which, is a great moment. And then, of course, it turns into the typical, Rainbird has a gun trained on Andy, Cap's there, Charlie's there, they're fighting over Charlie, and finally Cap just completely loses it. He snaps, he starts screaming about a snake, which is really just a hose, and Rainbird is distracted. He's shocked, which gives enough time for Andy to move out of the line of fire, and Andy gives the biggest push he's ever done in his life, telling Rainbird to jump out of the loft. And Rainbird does. Quote, "The pain that ripped through his head like splintering shards of shrapnel was sickening in its force, and he felt something give, finally and irrevocably." Page 365. So now Andy is just, he had been getting little numb spots, and now he is just completely shot. His entire left side is numb. He can't really support himself anymore. He has caused something major to happen inside of him, and he is broken. He will be dying regardless of what happens next. Cap is killing the hose with a rake, and Rainbird, once he falls to the ground, he is kind of broken and battered himself, but he still manages to squeeze off a shot at Andy. He misses. He aims again, shoots Andy on the side of his face, or on the side of his neck, I think. And Charlie just sends this huge burst of fire energy toward Rainbird when he tries to shoot her, and she just completely disintegrates Rainbird and Cap. And she blows out the entire back of the barn, and there have been agents who've started swarming around, circling the barn, so the ones in the back just get decapitated, cut in half. Some of them run away. It's not good. Charlie burns the latches off of the stalls so that all the horses can get out. She crawls toward her dad. The horses are stampeding. They're running out the front. There are men, agents in the front, who start shooting the horses because they're just all keyed up and they are, freaked out. So they start mowing down horses. There are dead horses everywhere. Andy gives instructions to Charlie about how she needs to make these people pay for this. They shouldn't cover it up. She needs to get somewhere safe and, make them pay for what they've done. And he dies. She goes out of the barn and she is pissed off that they've killed the horses, and she just starts sending fire everywhere. She burns one of the farmhouses. Quote, "She did not want to kill people. That had not changed. What had changed was that she'd kill them if she had to." Page 372. There's a guy who comes out in a car and she just makes it explode. She gets the electric fence and it starts shorting out and electrocuting people, and there are dogs in there, the guard dogs, they get killed, people are shooting. It's just the ultimate in destruction. And she finally, when she's finished, directs her firepower into the duck pond, and there's just barely enough water in it to be enough. And when it's all over, there are just little puddles left in the mud. And she picks herself up, climbs over the electric fence. The final chapter is Charlie alone. So the great cover-up begins. The shop is trying to cover its ass, trying to pretend that, it was just a terrorist attack, nothing really out of the ordinary, it was just a basic double cross, etc., etc. And the plan is still to find Charlie and kill her. So they've started watching all the major newspapers in case she goes to them with her story. And Charlie ends up returning to the Manders farm. So Irv and Norma, they take her in, and they had been paid off by the shop and threatened, if you say anything, we'll go after your family. And they take her in, but they have to get her a doctor because she's been wandering and she's cut up and she has kind of infections and stuff like that. So he agrees to keep the secret, and they just have her in the house. She tells them her story once she has recovered a little bit, and months pass. They're trying to decide what to do. They need to do something that's going to protect Charlie and themselves because she's kind of put them in a dangerous position, which she overhears them talking, and she feels bad that she, caused this problematic situation for them. And so she ends up leaving. She writes them a note and says that she knows what to do now. She leaves, and that very day the shop has tracked her down to the Manders farm because small town gossip finally caught up. The doctor told someone after a few months, and then that person told another person after a short period of time, and then it just started spreading throughout the town. So everyone knew that the Manders had a little kid staying with them. And then it reached the wrong set of ears. That person had shop ties and called and reported Charlie. So the shop starts surrounding the Manders farm, but Charlie's not there. Charlie goes to a library in New York and asks the librarian if he can recommend a publication that is honest, nationwide, and has no government ties. So he sends her on her way with an address, and we find out that she is going to the Rolling Stone offices, and she is ready to tell her story. I love that they incorporated Rolling Stone magazine into this, and that is who Charlie is going to share her Firestarter story with. And, you know, it makes you wonder what becomes of Charlie. We're really happy that she made it out. Manders didn't seem to suffer any consequences. The implications for what happens to the shop are unknown, but can't be good. In the afterwards, Stephen King talks about how, you know, thank you to these people who have helped me write this book. He mentions his daughter, Naomi, who helped him with the character of Charlie. Quote, "She's not Charlie, but she helped me to help Charlie be herself." So I love that. And that is Firestarter. I think it's a great read. It's very intriguing, and it really fits in with the Stephen King canon because, you know, he's good at writing about girls who have mental powers, telepathic stuff. Stephen King does a lot of that. It does kind of make me think about Carrie, and it also makes me think of Gillian from The Fury, which I will have a chat about that book coming out soon. So if you have read The Fury, or if you like the movie, I finally read the book. I finally tracked it down. That will be coming up shortly. Have a spooky day.